Hello, and welcome to this virtual presentation presented by the UC Berkeley Office of Undergraduate Admissions. The purpose of today's presentation is to give you effective strategies on how to successfully complete the different sections of the application and essentially make yourself a more competitive student for the University of California, Berkeley. We're going to talk about 5 different things today. We'll talk briefly about applying to the University of California and the requirements that we are looking for. And then we'll dive into a little bit more detail when talking about the activities and awards section and the personal insight questions. We'll then give you a writing strategy on how to start to build a foundation to answering the personal insight questions. And lastly, we'll end with a few resources that can help you as you navigate this process. So we're going to start with applying to the UC. When applying to the UC, you want to think about it in 2 parts: eligibility and selection. Eligibility is essentially the basic admissions requirements. Selection is what we call our comprehensive review process, and selection becomes necessary for selective schools like UC Berkeley, where there's a lot of demand and we receive a lot of applications. So in terms of UC eligibility, the minimum requirements are that you complete the 7-course pattern, which includes 2 courses in English composition, 1 course in mathematical concepts and quantitative reasoning, and 4 courses from at least 2 of the following areas: arts and humanities, social and behavioral sciences, and physical and biological science. You must also complete at least 60 semester or 90 quarter units of UC transferable credit and have a minimum 2.4 GPA in UC transferable courses. At Berkeley, as part of our selection process and part of our comprehensive review, we have different minimum eligibility requirements. We refer to our eligibility requirements as BUG, B-U-G. B is for breadth, for the intended college and the major that you are applying to. For those of you that have not checked your breadth for the college you're applying to, you can go to assist.org, and you can also visit our website at guide.berkeley.edu to determine what courses you need to complete for the breadth for the college that you're applying to. Every college does have a different set of breadth requirements and has different ways of satisfying those requirements. So it's very important that you're looking at those requirements from the ASSIST website or from the colleges themselves or guide.berkeley.edu. We also will be looking for 60 semester or 90 quarter UC transferable units. That's what the U in BUG is for. And then lastly, the G is for GPA. And we do require a minimum 3.0 UC transferable GPA. If you want to learn more about our transfer requirements, you can visit the website below, and it'll talk to you in more detail about our requirements, as well as how we select students and what are some things that we're looking for when selecting applicants. When selecting applicants, we use what is called comprehensive review. This means that we consider all achievements, both academic and non-academic, and essentially we're looking at everything about you. We're looking at what you do not only inside of the classroom, but also outside of the classroom and in your community. There is no single attribute or characteristic that guarantees admission of any applicant to Berkeley. So there's no magic GPA, there's no magic number of courses or pattern of courses that guarantees admission of any student, because again, we look at everything about you beyond just your grades, your GPA, and your coursework. This comprehensive review does allow us to get to know you through the application and all of the information that you provide. Some of the areas that we highlight in selecting students is major preparation, the prerequisites for the major you're applying to, especially for high demand majors. Major prep is very important because you are going to be coming into the university at junior standing taking upper division courses. And so we want to make sure that you're prepared to take those courses by completing most, and for some programs, all of the major prerequisites for the major you're applying to. So major preparation in the form of the prerequisites for the major as listed on assist.org or on our website, the departmental websites, is very important. Academic improvement is something that we acknowledge. We see a lot of students that start off their careers maybe not doing so well, and then take a few years off and come back and are doing really, really well in the classroom. This is what we call an upward trend in grades. This is something that we value in the application and something we want to know more about. So if you do have this particular instance, you can use any of the sections we'll talk about in a few slides to highlight and explain where that academic improvement came from. If you have veteran status or you're a reentry student, which is classified as a student 25 years of age or older, or a student parent, or you have tribal affiliation, these are all things that add value to the application and all things that we want to know about your experiences and what makes you unique. Lastly, there's special program participation, which is things that we also look at. So for example, if you're in Puente, if you're in a program like the Starting Point Mentorship Program, Umoja, any of those kinds of enrichment programs or special programs through your school, through a major or an academic program, all of those things are also what we call added value. At the end of the day, every applicant is pretty much on a level playing field, and information in the application is either considered neutral or added value. The students that take advantage of more of the opportunities that they have available to them end up adding the most value to their applications, thus end up becoming more competitive. So these are some of the things we look at when selecting our students. And as a part of that comprehensive review and getting to know you, 2 sections in particular that we're going to focus on, the activities, awards, and additional comments, and the personal insight questions, can be very helpful in providing us a lot of that context. So in the UC application, there's 9 sections. The first 4 sections, personal information, campus and major selection, scholarships, about you, a lot of that is self-explanatory. A lot of that is coursework and things that you've already done that pretty much you've completed. There's not much you can do anymore to really kind of change a lot of that information, right? You're either going to take courses that you may be repeating in the fall, continue to do well, and then continue to do well in the spring. But really, it's the activities and awards, the personal insight questions, and then a part in the academic history where you have a lot more control, where you as a student have a lot more control of essentially telling us everything about you that makes you a great candidate for the university. So we're going to focus on those particular areas in this presentation in a little bit more detail. So we're going to start with the activities and awards. Inside this section, you're going to see that there's 6 different parts. There's a section for educational prep programs, one for community service, one for your work experience, one for our awards and honors, another for extracurricular activities, and then there's going to be a part for you to review these activities and awards so that you can move on to the next section. When it comes to activities and awards, the time frame that we're looking at is college. What is it that you have done recently? We're not too concerned with what you may have done in high school. A lot of students do put that information. And again, if you do, in our eyes, it's just going to be considered neutral. It's not going to disadvantage you in any shape or form. But we are looking primarily at what it is that you've done in the time that you've been in college. Activities and awards do not have to be school related. They do not have to be sponsored by the school, nor do they have to be held at the school. For transfer students, oftentimes your extracurricular activity is your employment. Many of you work, many of you hold jobs. If you're working 20, 30, or 40 hours a week, that is your extracurricular activity. That is exactly what we view as extracurricular. So don't undermine your employment as being extracurricular just because it's something that you need to do versus something that is an optional thing to do, like joining a club or an organization. So think outside the box and don't limit yourself to activities and awards that are just sponsored through the school. We want to know your commitment, right? Was this award that you may have received or this activity you participated in, was it a local award, meaning just within your community college or your college? Was it a state award? Was it a national award, right? A lot of you compete nationally in sports programs and different academic programs, right? And statewide awards as well. Those are great things that we want to know that provide us contextual information. We want to know any positions that you may have held in these different activities. Did you hold office? Were you a president, a treasurer, a vice president? We want to know the years, weeks, and hours you spent dedicated to these activities. And then we want to know if you've had any leadership roles in any one of these activities and experiences that you talk about. The contextual information and what you've done and how you did those things is very important. In the activities and awards, when you start to fill out this section, we want you to write out the full name and then use acronyms. There's a lot of acronyms for a lot of clubs and organizations and awards at the different colleges, and oftentimes we don't know them all. So write out the full name, then use the acronyms. Abbreviating is okay. There is a character count, I believe, of 160 characters. And so if you need to abbreviate so that it allows you more space to write more contextual information, that is absolutely fine. Just make sure that whatever you are abbreviating, we or any person that is reading this particular portion is going to understand what it is that you're trying to say. Please write about your role, right, and what you did in that role. Don't just tell us that you were a captain, but show us what you did as a captain. What was your role? What were your responsibilities? Again, the contextual information is what's important. Let us know if it was selective, right? Give those quantitative measures. Were there 400 students? How many students, right? Was it a lot of students applying for this award? Were there a lot of students in this particular activity? Was there a certain GPA requirement that you needed to be eligible for an award? All of these different quantitative measures help give us the context and understand how prestigious an award may be that you may have received, or how competitive an activity may have been that you participated in. We're looking for descriptions, not definitions. It's not so much important to define what a captain is, but to describe what you did as a captain, right? It's not important to define what the role of the president is for a particular club, but to describe and provide a description of what you did in that particular role. We want you to capture your accomplishments in each of these activities. What are the highlights and what are the things that you value and you found important in these different activities? When it comes to the time that you've devoted to the activity, we're looking for a best estimate of the time commitment. We're not looking for an exact number of hours, an exact number of weeks per year, but just a rough estimate is going to be perfectly fine. And then consider non-traditional activities. Oftentimes, a lot of us are caring for siblings or family. We're working unpaid for a family business. And these things oftentimes are just normal to us, right? I've been taking care of my siblings for the past 20 years of my life. And so I don't see this as extracurricular. But the reality is that it is extracurricular. And those are things you want to consider when filling out this portion of the application. Essentially, anything that you do that is extra, that is productive, that helps you be a more successful individual is considered extracurricular. And when in doubt, if you're not sure whether or not something is considered extracurricular, put it in the application. Because again, I'll say it, and as I said before, information on the application is either neutral or added value. So if you put something on there that maybe we don't see as added value, worst case scenario, it's just going to be neutral information. So think outside of the box and think of non-traditional activities that you might consider to include in these activities and awards. So let's give you a quick example of a neutral response versus a response that has a little bit more added value. So here we see a student that received the Soaring Eagle Award. It was an academic award in May 2015, and we see that the student says that it was given to one student every year for academic performance. Now, the reason why this isn't such an added value response is because there's a lot of assumptions and a lot of questions that I have that still are unclear. Soaring Eagle sounds great, sounds majestic, sounds important, but I'm not quite sure that that's really what it is. The student does say that it's given to one student every year for academic performance, but there's no contextual information. It could well be that for this particular award, they put every student's name in a fishbowl and they draw a name, and whoever's name gets drawn gets the Soaring Eagle Award. How do I know that the student needed to compete against other students? Or how do I know that there were other students even eligible for this award? And then academic performance. What does the student mean by academic performance? Great academic performance, general academic performance. So again, you can see that there's a lot of questions that are still not answered in this particular section. So to use the same example and how we can add more value to it, we've done something here. And so we see that it's the same award. And this time, the student says that it's an academic excellence award of a 3.8 plus GPA. They were the only students selected from 450 in their graduating class, and it was awarded by the school district and comes with a $100 scholarship. So you can see now that the contextual information, the details, are a lot more visible here in this second this second example. Now I know that the academic performance meant academic excellence. The student, in order to be eligible for this award, had to have a 3.8 or higher GPA, which is a great, great accomplishment. Now I know that they were the only students selected from a total of 450. There's those quantitative measures. Oftentimes we see students say second place in a robotics competition. And while second place is usually a good thing, how do I know that there weren't only 2 people that competed in that competition and you ended up getting the second prize? It's important to say second place out of X amount of participants to give us the information and the details that we need. The student also lets us know that it's a school district award. So it wasn't just a local award for the student that were in their college, but it was an award for students that were in the college's district, meaning that they may have been competing with 3, 4, or more other colleges within that district, and then they got a $100 scholarship. So you can see here that the student did a more effective job at giving us the contextual information that adds more value to this particular section. And this is the reason why we're doing this presentation. We see a lot of students that'll say things like captain of the volleyball team, you know, first and second year, freshman and sophomore year. And while captain is a great thing and we understand that it's a leadership role, captain can mean different things at different places. So letting us know and showing us what you've done as a captain and what it is that you had to do to get this captainship, all of that detail, all of that context makes these activities and awards descriptions that much more effective. So this is just one example of how you can make a response or a description a little bit more valuable in terms of getting a little bit more competitive on the application. Additional comments. So there are 2 additional comment boxes. One of them is after your academic history, and there's one after the personal insight questions. There's a 550 word limit, and these are optional comment boxes. These comment boxes are really to be used for providing any information or any additional context that we may not otherwise see in the rest of the application. So for example, in the academic history section, students oftentimes want to explain bad grades, or they want to explain grade changes, or why they may have had to repeat a course, right? They may explain why they received all A's, you know, for their entire career, but one semester they got a course full of C's. And it may be that something happened that semester to that student, whether it was a personal matter, a financial matter, something that was traumatic, whatever the case may be. Giving us that context to understand why maybe the student didn't perform as well as they did in all of the other terms is absolutely helpful. You can highlight grade trends, explain gaps in education. Students oftentimes use this section to explain why they may have received a W in a course, and a W in a course is just neutral information. It's not negative at all. It's not used to disadvantage a student. W's and RI's are just neutral. But students oftentimes feel comfortable explaining why they received a W, and that's perfectly fine. So at the end of the day, the additional comments are to explain anything that we wouldn't otherwise see in the rest of the application. The one thing that it is not an extension of your personal insight question responses. So this is not an opportunity for you to continue a response that you may have been working on that is limited to 350 words. And it's also not an opportunity to answer another question or more after the 4 that you've answered that are required. So that's what it's not. It's really just for the additional context. So speaking of the personal insight questions, that is our next section. So what are the personal insight questions? These are about getting to know you better, right? To get to know your life experiences, your interests, your ambitions, and your aspirations. Essentially, it's your interview with the admissions office. We don't conduct in-person interviews, but this is your opportunity to tell us who you are, what makes you unique, and what makes you a valuable candidate for our university. We want you to be open, be reflective, and find your individual voice and express it. At the end of the day, these are personal insight questions, which means that there should also be personal responses. And while this section of the application is just one part that we consider when making the admission decision, it does help to provide context for the rest of your application, right? So your grades and your coursework, that does tell us a lot about you, but it's really in this section that we get to see the you, the inner you, the person who is inside of you that makes you who you are and that makes you the unique individual that you are. So the instructions for the PIQs, or the personal insight questions, is that you do have 8 questions to choose from. One of those is a mandatory question in which you must respond to, and it's the first question. And then you're going to have to choose 3 of the 7 remaining questions. Each response is limited to a maximum of 350 words, and the application will shut you down at 350 words. So you want to make sure that you're staying within that max limit. And then which questions you choose to answer is entirely up to you, right? We don't have any preference in terms of one question being more effective than another question. What we're looking for is for you to answer the questions that are most relevant to your experiences and the questions that are going to provide us the most context and information and insight into who you are. The personal insight questions here are listed as they do appear on the application itself. You will see that the first one says that it is a required question, and it asks you to describe how you have prepared for your intended major, including your readiness to succeed in your upper division courses once you enroll at the university. And then you do have to choose 3 of the remaining 7. One thing I will note with these questions, in particular, the first question, the required question, is that I've seen a lot of students answer this question in a very literal way. And what I mean by that is that when they're asked to describe how they've prepared for their intended major, they talk in a literal sense about how they've planned their coursework. And they'll talk about going to orientation and meeting with the counselor and putting a student ed plan together and taking the appropriate courses for the major as well as for the breadth for the college they're applying to. And so a lot of that information is great information. A lot of that information is stuff that we do know already. But the reality is that the question, the required question, what it's really asking is, where is your interest in the major, right? We're really wanting to see how invested you are in the major you're pursuing. So we're looking for you to write about experiences that you may have participated in, whether that be in the classroom or outside, that demonstrate your interest for the major that you're pursuing. We're looking for things that are recent. What are experiences that you've done while you've been at the college prior to transferring that demonstrate that you're interested and heavily invested in the major that you're pursuing? That's what we're looking for in this required question. So don't approach it in a literal sense and give us a rundown and a summary of how you chose your classes and how you planned out your coursework and took the courses and went to assist and did all that planning. But what we're really looking for is, where did your interest in the major validate itself to show that you're truly invested? When looking at these questions, you can see that they're questions, right? You can see that they're about a few words in length. A lot of them do say describe, 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 which is a key for you, right? To focus on the description part of it. But when looking at these questions, ultimately what you can do is break them down into a few words. Each one of these questions is centered around a particular theme, right? So the required question is asking about your interest in the major. There's one question that's asking you about leadership, one that's asking about your creativity, one that's asking about a talent or skill that you have, another one about an educational opportunity or barrier that you may have experienced, a challenge that you may have overcame, an instance where you've helped your community, and then finally, something else that you'd like us to know. So approaching these questions can be looked at as these particular themes. And we'll talk a little bit more about why this particular slide is important when we talk about the strategy for building a foundation. So just some information about the PIQs, the personal insight questions. One is that it is not an essay. Oftentimes, students get confused and think that we're looking for an essay-style response. But the fact is that we're looking for a student to speak to us in a way that if we were just having a conversation, right? Again, we're going to go back to this whole idea that this is the interview with the UC. And so you're not going to be speaking to someone and doing it in a way where you're using a lot of adjectives and a lot of scene setting and a lot of storytelling. But we're looking for you to get straight, direct, and to the point. You're limited to 350 words. So a lot of what we call sometimes the fluff and a lot of the things about, scene setting don't quite tell us a lot about you. And so to give you an example, students oftentimes will say things like, as I sat in my parents', kitchen, and my mother was baking some fresh, nice smelling cookies. And I was, thinking about my responses, and, it was a bright and sunny day. Like, all of that scene setting doesn't really give us context about you, right? It tells me maybe that your parents cooked some really awesome cookies and some really delicious cookies. It tells me that you have some great sun in your kitchen, and you have some great lighting. But what does it tell me about you? Not too much. So you want to stray away from approaching these responses like an essay. These responses are never read alone, so we do use these responses in context with all of the other aspects of the application, all of the other different sections. And then these responses are not graded, right? What's important for us is the context. What's important for us is what's inside of these responses. We're not editing these responses. We're not looking to see if you're a great writer, if you don't know how to use proper sentence structure and proper grammar. That's not what we're looking for, right? Obviously, we want it to make sense. We want it to flow. We want to be able to understand what it is that you're writing. But ultimately, what we're looking for is the context in these responses, not so much proofreading and editing and correcting all of your grammar and structure. Sob stories do not guarantee admission. We hear a lot of students say that if you write a sob story or something that's emotional, that it'll make you more competitive. The fact of the matter is that we're not too concerned with the sob story. What we're concerned with more is how did that story or how did that experience influence you as a person? How did that experience change you as a person? How did it make you somebody better, right? What did that do to you as an individual? The theme again is the you, the personal, not so much the actual story itself and describing what that story was, but focusing more on the effects of that story and what those effects of that experience are on you, the student. I and my statements are highly encouraged. In an essay, oftentimes we hear from our professors that not to start a sentence with I or with my. In this case, and in these responses, starting your responses with I and my is a good thing because it lets you know and us as readers know that you're bringing the information back to you, the person who's applying to the university. And keep in mind that one response is read by all the UC campuses that the student applies to, so you're not writing individual responses for every UC that you apply to, but you're going to write those same 4 responses you choose in the application, and every campus is going to use those responses in reviewing your application. So you just want to remain neutral. We'll talk a little bit about that. Things to do with your personal insight responses is be specific. Tell us about the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, and the how. Give us details. Give us concrete examples that show us what it is that you're doing. We oftentimes tell students, don't just tell us that you're a president of a particular club, but show us what you did. Don't just tell us that you're creative because you love to sing, but show us how you express that creativity. It's the show me part, it's the details and the examples that add more value to these responses. Choose quality over quantity of examples. One of the things I see a lot of students doing is they give us a list of different things and experiences that speak to the question that's at hand. And to give you an example, leadership. Students applying to Berkeley want Berkeley readers to know of all of the different leadership things that they've done. And so in these responses, they'll end up saying things like, I was the president of our student body and we, got free lunch for all of our students. Furthermore, I was a captain of the volleyball team and we made it to the state championship. Also, you see where I'm going with it? It comes off as a list and doesn't give us the context. It doesn't give us that information that provides insight into who you are. So rather than giving us a list of all of your leadership experiences, it's more valuable to choose one thing and focus on one particular experience or one particular opportunity in those responses. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the section about building your foundation. You want to start early, get feedback, and revise. Let other people read your responses. Let them give you some feedback. They oftentimes will say things that you forget. They oftentimes will find some of the assumptions that we may be making or that you may be making, thinking that we know, and they might need a little bit more clarity. So getting feedback is helpful, and then revising the responses and polishing them as much as you can is also helpful as well. You want to focus on more recent experiences. We do get a lot of students that talk about, childhood memories and things that they did when they were in middle school and oftentimes even high school. The idea really is to try to stay focused on more recent experiences, right? So challenges, barriers, opportunities, things you've done for your community. If you can speak to something that's more recent, that's going to tell us more about you, especially the relevance to who you are today. So try to focus on things that are more recent, experiences, opportunities that you've done either when you were at the college or slightly before that, right? I know a lot of, applicants oftentimes are far removed from high school because they took some time off. And those are good things to talk about as well. But I guess the idea is not to talk so much about things that you might have done when, you were in elementary school or middle school, but really think to something that is more recent. And then choose questions that will give us the most information about you. So think critically about the questions. Think about all the different opportunities and experiences that you have that speak to the questions and that answer those questions. And then choose the ones that are going to give us the most insight into who you are. Right, as if you're speaking to a stranger and treat it like an interview, right? We're coming back to this idea that, we are strangers, right? Where this is the first time that we're getting to hear you from your perspective, from your voice on this application. And so you want to make sure that you're writing without making any assumptions, right? And without assuming that I might know things about you or qualities about you when I've never met you. So make sure that you're giving us the complete details. Make sure that you're not making assumptions, and providing clarity on your responses as well. Tell your story, okay? This is huge. We get a lot of students that talk about their parents or talk about maybe a professor that was influential to them or somebody that, had a very, heavy impact on their lives. And oftentimes those are some great stories and there's some great individuals that we learn about. But ultimately, we need to know about you, right? You're the student applying to the university. We need to know your story. And so if you do choose to talk about an experience that does involve somebody else besides yourself, make sure that the focus isn't on describing that experience and that other individual, but the focus should be on you. Again, the effect that it had on you. How did that change you? What did it do to you as an individual? Those are the kinds of things that we're looking for. So make sure that, again, you're telling us your story, from your view, from your feelings, One of the things I tell students a lot of the times is that, we're looking for the inner you, right? We're looking for your soul. That's what you want to do, is tell us your story. You want to use a word processing document and then copy and paste it into the application. So, using like Microsoft Word or Notepad, that'll be helpful because the application does time out after a certain period of time. And so if you're thinking about your thoughts and it does take you longer than the 30-minute timeout period, it does not save your response. And so you may lose everything that you wrote if you write it directly in the application. So a good practice is to use a word processing document, write everything that you need, all of your responses, and then just copy and paste them into the application when you're ready to submit. And then do remember that the application does cut each response at 350 words. So you want to make sure that you're staying within those limits so that we get the full story about you and we don't miss any details in your responses. Some things not to do with these personal insight questions. You do not want to use cliches, quotes, or jokes. Remember to use your own words. We get a lot of students that, quote famous individuals or quote people from, different social media and just kind of popular culture. And oftentimes those things, yeah, they're good, but when you use other people's quotes, you're using words that aren't yours, right? It ends up not being personal, and it ends up taking away from the 350 word count that you have allocated to write these responses. Cliches and jokes, sometimes they're good, sometimes they're funny, but a lot of times they go over our heads. A lot of times we don't understand what you're trying to say, and the jokes and the cliches, again, don't give us a lot of context about you, doesn't really provide us a lot of insight into who you are. Don't write about a particular UC campus. You got to remember you're applying to multiple UC campuses, or you might be applying to multiple UC campuses, and we all use the same application. And writing about a particular campus, even if you're only applying to one campus, still isn't that effective, because when you're writing about a campus and you're highlighting what that campus offers and how much of a benefit it would be for you as a student to be admitted to this campus, to take advantage of all of the resources and opportunities that that campus has, you're talking about a campus that we're familiar with and not giving us the contextual information about you. So try to stray away from talking about a campus and what opportunities are there that you've identified as things that you really want to pursue and take advantage of. Make sure you're talking about yourself. Don't write about events in the distant past. We talked a little bit about that earlier, right? Make sure that your responses are more recent and relevant to what you're doing now. And then do not be ashamed to brag. This is the one opportunity you have to brag about yourself, to highlight your experiences, to highlight your accomplishments, and really let us know of all the things that make you a wonderful person. Don't write about everyone but yourself, right? We talked about that earlier, right? Make sure that you're bringing it back to you. Make sure that you're bringing it back to the person that is applying to the university. Don't duplicate information, right, that can be found in other parts of the application. I get this question a lot, is it okay to talk about an activity that I might have put in the extracurricular activity section? And it is absolutely okay to do that. You just want to make sure that you're not rewriting what you already have in that extracurricular activities description, and making sure that you're providing more contextual information to give us that insight into who you are. Don't assume that we know anything about you, so make sure that you're clear about everything that you're describing in those responses. And then lastly, just to reiterate one more time, do not treat this like an essay for an English class. You really want to approach this as if you were having a conversation with somebody, as if we were just talking and you were telling me about your experiences and showing me your experiences in a brief and concise manner. Some myths and misconceptions. Students have asked, right, is it bad to mention race, ethnicity, sexuality, citizenship, religion, or political views, etc.? Absolutely not. These are your responses. They're personal. You can choose to write about whatever you feel most comfortable writing about, and it will not have any negative impact on you. We as readers put our biases aside, reread these applications with an unbiased viewpoint. And so please write about whatever you are most passionate about, write about whatever most resonates with who you are, and don't feel that there's anything bad that you may write on your response that we're going to view as negative. With that said, the second question asked if there are any things that I should not say that may be held negatively against me. Absolutely not. We talked about it earlier in the presentation. Everything on the application is either neutral or added value. Nothing is held negative on the application. Nothing is viewed as negative. So please feel free to write with whatever comfort you feel and whatever experiences and opportunities you want to write about. And then your responses will not be shared with the general public. Students ask all the time. These responses are confidential. They're only read by the admissions readers in the different admissions offices. We don't share these responses. We don't use these responses as well as examples to share with the general public. Your responses do remain confidential, so feel free to write whatever it is that you feel most comfortable writing about and whatever you feel is going to add more value to your application about who you are and giving us that insight. So let's go ahead and look at building your foundation. And when I talk about building the foundation, a lot of students often ask me, how do I approach these responses? And it brings me back to a time when I was in graduate school and I had to write my thesis, which was very lengthy. And I sat in my advisor's office and I told them that I was frustrated and that I was a little overwhelmed with having to write a thesis in a lot of pages. And I'll never forget that he asked me a question, and it's a question that fits very well with approaching these responses. And the question he asked me was, how do you eat an elephant? And I sat there and I just kind of looked, and he actually ended up saying, one bite at a time. And what he explained to me was that my thesis was this big elephant that I was looking at, that I was trying to buy or eat in one big bite, which was going to be pretty much impossible to do. That's how a lot of students view these responses, these personal insight questions. They view them as one big elephant that oftentimes is overwhelming. And so the idea here is to break down these responses and break down these questions into smaller pieces that allow us to approach these questions in a one bite at a time fashion, that make it easier for us to consume this response and to approach this question, and makes it less overwhelming and less intimidating at times. So here's what you're going to do. Remember, we talked about the personal insight questions in a few words. So here they are again: interest in major, leadership, creativity, talent, skills, so on and so forth. What you're going to do is you're going to choose, right, one of the questions to answer. So let's just say that I want to look at the question about leadership. So we're going to choose that one word. We're going to look at that word and we're going to say leadership. And we're going to think critically about all of the different experiences that are recent that I've demonstrated some leadership abilities in. And once we've thought about those, we're going to write those down. And so in my case, I have 5 different experiences. Your list might be longer, it might be shorter. But for this example, we're going to use these 5 experiences. So I have here a president of the student body, president of the honor society, captain of the robotics competition, caretaker for my siblings and grandparents, and manager at my local restaurant, which is my job. Now that you've written these experiences down, you're going to want to think critically about all of these experiences. Think about what was valuable about these experiences. Think about what about these experiences can show us as readers who you are. Which of these experiences is going to give us the most insight, and which of these experiences is most relevant to you and the question being asked about leadership. So now that we've thought critically about these different experiences, we're going to choose one. And in this instance, I'm going to choose to talk about being a caretaker. What do you think you do with the other 4 that we did not talk about that are also worthy of being in the application? Well, you put those in the extracurricular activities and award section if there's space. And if there's not, you can also use the additional comments to include all of these different leadership experiences. And so that way, as a student, you don't feel like you're not letting the reader know about all of the amazing leadership opportunities that you've taken advantage of, and only talking about one in your responses. Now, we're going to still see that you've had all of these leadership experiences, and your responses are going to be a lot more effective because you're going to be talking about one particular experience and giving us those details and examples. So now that we've identified that leadership is a question we're answering, we've wrote down our list of experiences, we've chosen to talk about this caretaker experience, and we're now going to brainstorm, and we're going to break it down, and we're going to ask questions like, describe what your role as a caretaker is. What do you do as a caretaker? When do you have to be a caretaker? Is it after school? Is it during school? Do you have to find alternatives to get to your classes, right? Where are you taking care of your siblings and your grandparents, right? Why and how? All of these different questions you can ask to help you start to break it down into details and context that gives us insight into who you are. Now you're going to give yourself a way better foundation and a guide to build on when writing your responses. So the last thing you're going to do, now that we've identified the question, we've identified the word as leadership, we've identified all of the experiences that have leadership in them, we've chosen one of those experiences, here being the caretaker, we've brainstormed and broke it down, and we put all of the different details and answered a lot of the questions that provide that contextual information. Now what we're going to do is you're going to write freely. And what I mean by that is you're just going to write. Start writing your response. Don't limit yourself to writing your thoughts within 350 words. It's okay if you write beyond 350 words. It's okay if you write 1,000 words, if you write 700 words. You're just going to write freely and continue to write until you feel comfortable enough to say that you've got all of the details and context about this one experience on a piece of paper. Once you've written freely, it's a lot easier to shorten your response to the 350 words by taking things out that don't add value, that don't add any context to the responses. It's a lot more difficult to try to gather all of your thoughts and put them down on a piece of paper and stay within those 350 words versus shortening the response. So once you have your 1,000 words or 700 words or whatever the count may be, then you can start taking things out that might be more definition versus description. Maybe you defined what a president is in this particular club or organization, where you maybe could still define it, but in a lot shorter words, right? So that you can use the additional words for the description part about what you did. Maybe you're using a lot of adjectives and a lot of scene setting and a lot of essay style writing. Those are the things that you can start to omit and start to break down so that eventually you're going to get to a solid 350 word response. Once you've gotten your response down to those 350 words, you can start to revise it within those 350 words. You'll want to share it with other people to get some feedback on those responses. And then you'll want to polish your responses and fine-tune them as much as you possibly can. This guide, this foundation, this way of doing it, it's proven effective with a lot of students, right? Again, it's not really telling you what to write about, right? We're not telling you that you should write about this or that. But what we're doing here is we're giving you a strategy to help you gather your thoughts and to help you break it down into smaller pieces so that it's not as overwhelming as it sometimes feels. Hopefully, this strategy will allow you to hone in on a particular experience and provide those details and those examples and the responses, which become more effective and more added value. This is what we're looking for. Stick to one topic, stick to one idea, give us those details, something that is recent and relevant to you and the question being asked. Not so much the list of things that are creative or a list of opportunities or barriers that you may have had to face. It's really honing down on one particular instance and one particular idea. Lastly, we want to share some resources with you to help you as you complete these applications. There's great personal insight question information on both the UC system-wide webpage as well as our Berkeley Admissions webpage. You can visit both of those websites to gain more information. The UC system-wide webpage, the first link up there, has a link to a guide. It's a 2-sheet guide that helps us ask some questions and help you kind of navigate each of the individual questions that you need to explore when you're responding to. So that'll be a great place to look at as well. And then lastly, we do have admissions officers here in our office. Every admissions officer is responsible for a different region in California, throughout the United States. And then we also have international admissions officers. Please feel free to visit the web link there on the screen. Click on either the county, state, or international. And what you're going to want to do is search for the admissions officer that serves the county or area that your school is located in. Emails are provided there. You're more than welcome to email your admissions officer about any questions that you have that are related to UC Berkeley Admissions. That is the page that you'll want to use to get all of that great information. We hope that you found some value in this presentation. We hope that it's allowed you to approach the different sections of the application and make them more effective so that they do add more value and thus give us more insight into who you are and provide us that contextual information. Please don't hesitate to contact us if you have any questions. Please feel free to visit all of our websites, all of the different resources that we provided you. And thank you for participating. Go Bears.